The door didn't creak. That's how you knew it was planned. One soft click and a man slid into a child's room like he owned the air. No lantern, no footsteps, just confidence. The kind that comes from living your whole life in a place where nobody says no to you. I've seen that look before. Harlem, back when a man could buy silence with a handshake and a threat. Different streets, same math. And in that moment, the only thing standing between that boy and whatever came next was the woman who walked in behind him. Catherine Webb didn't scream. She didn't faint. She didn't do the things polite society expects from a lady. She closed the door. Then she spoke low, level, controlled. Step away from him. The man turned like he'd been interrupted during prayer. Marcus Webb, overseer. The real boss of Cypress Ridge, even if some rich name in New Orleans signed the papers. On that land, Marcus was the law, the judge, and the punishment. He smiled at his wife like she was being cute. "Go back to bed," he said. "This don't concern you." That boy Joseph was sitting up in the dark, too still for his age. A kid learns real fast when fear is the only teacher, and Joseph had been learning in private lessons for years. Catherine's hand moved, not shaking, not hesitant, just decision. She crossed the room and put herself between Marcus and the bed. You don't do that unless you've reached the point where consequences don't scare you anymore. Marcus's eyes hardened. "You forget who you married," he said. And that's when I realized what Catherine realized too. She hadn't just caught a man doing something wrong, she had caught the truth. Cypress Ridge wasn't a home, it was a machine. 15,000 acres of wet Louisiana earth, sugar cane stretching like a green ocean, and hundreds of souls trapped inside the gears. People worked that crop until their backs didn't belong to them anymore. And Marcus Webb, he was the engineer, not loud, not sloppy, not emotional, professional. He didn't punish out of rage. He punished like a man balancing a ledger. Enough pain to break your pride, not enough to break your body, just enough to keep the machine running. That kind of evil is the worst kind, because it doesn't feel like evil when it's happening. It feels like routine. Catherine had been his partner in that routine. She wasn't some soft-hearted spectator hiding behind lace curtains. She watched the yard. She watched the numbers. She watched the discipline. She knew which workers were slipping, who needed to be corrected, who needed to be made an example, and she slept fine. Until the day she noticed Rebecca. Rebecca moved different, not lazy, not slow, just careful, guarding her stomach like it was fragile glass, a thickening under her dress that didn't come from food, a tiredness deeper than exhaustion. Catherine had seen that look on women before. She recognized it the way a banker recognizes counterfeit money. She didn't ask questions out loud. She didn't have to. Because on a place like Cypress Ridge, there were only so many men who could make a woman pregnant, and only one man who believed rules were for other people. Marcus. Now, if you're expecting me to tell you Catherine's anger went where it should have gone, at the man with the power, you don't understand how people protect the lies that built their lives. Her fury went straight to Rebecca. She called her into the big house like she was summoning a thief. Rebecca stood in front of her with her head down, hands folded, eyes fixed on the floor. That posture wasn't respect, that was survival. Catherine circled her like a wolf that liked taking its time. "You think you can bring your mess into my home?" Catherine asked. Rebecca didn't answer. She could. On that plantation, words could get you buried. Catherine leaned in close enough that Rebecca could smell the perfume and fear on her breath. "You've created a problem," Catherine said, "and problems get dealt with." That was the old Catherine talking. The one who believed the world was divided clean, owners and owned, pure and dirty, safe and disposable. Then something cracked. Because beneath the rage, Catherine's mind did what smart minds do. It ran the numbers, it saw the chain reaction. Marcus had put his blood inside Rebecca. That meant the child would carry his face in some way. His eyes, his jaw, his mark. And on Cypress Ridge, even blood didn't guarantee protection. A child like that could be sold, used, broken. Worse, caught in the crossfire of Marcus's moods and the plantation's appetite. That reality hit Catherine like cold water, not because she suddenly grew a conscience, because she suddenly grew a possessive kind of love. Catherine had wanted children, couldn't have them. That emptiness sits in a woman's chest like a locked room nobody talks about. She'd been living with it so long she thought she'd made peace. But peace is a lie people tell themselves until life tests it. And now there was a child coming, not hers. Not Rebecca's in the way freedom lets a mother claim her child. It was Marcus's, and in Catherine's mind that made the boy hers to protect. So she started moving different. She watched Rebecca, but not like prey anymore, like a witness. Like a person Catherine had never allowed herself to fully see. She began to speak to her quieter, short phrases, no softness but less poison. "You keep your head down," Catherine told her one afternoon in passing where nobody else could hear. "When the time comes, you bring the boy to me." Rebecca looked up for the first time, not with gratitude, with suspicion sharp enough to cut, because Rebecca knew Catherine, not the perfume, not the education, the truth. Catherine Webb had stood beside Marcus while people were broken in the yard, so Rebecca didn't nod, she didn't thank her. She just asked the only question that mattered, voice barely above air. "Why?" Catherine had no clean answer, only a selfish one, so she lied, not fully but enough. "Because I said so," she replied. And that's the thing about power. Sometimes it protects you. Sometimes it traps you. Catherine thought her position meant she could claim that baby and build a fence around him. But Cypress Ridge wasn't hers. It was Marcus's either. It belonged to money. The plantation owner, Edmund Harrington, stayed in New Orleans, sipping brandy, reading ledgers, pretending ignorance was the same as innocence. As long as the sugar flowed and the profits stayed fat, he didn't care what Marcus did to make the numbers behave. And Marcus, he'd been running that place long enough to forget anyone outranked him. So when the boy was born, light-skinned, unmistakably marked by Marcus's blood, Catherine didn't ask for permission. She took him. She named him Joseph like she was stamping ownership onto a living thing. She brought him into her quarters. She kept him clean, fed, taught. And for a while she believed she'd beaten the system with a woman's will, but systems don't lose, they wait. Joseph grew older, smarter, sharp-eyed. He could read. He could speak like the house folk. He didn't get whipped. He didn't sleep in the quarters with the other children, and that kind of difference is dangerous because it creates questions. And questions create resentment. Out in the cabins, kids looked at Joseph like he was wearing the enemy's coat. Some didn't hate him, not really. They hated what he represented: favor, protection, a loophole, the kind of luck that makes everybody else feel doomed. Catherine saw that tension building and thought she could manage it. She thought she could smooth it over with extra food, extra kindness, extra rules. But on a place like Cypress Ridge, kindness isn't currency, fear is. And Marcus Webb had been minting fear for decades. Then came the day a boy named Thomas got caught taking food. Not stealing jewelry, not burning barns, food. Marcus decided to make it public. He called the children in, all of them, like a congregation. Catherine stood on the gallery and watched them gather, small faces turned toward the yard, trying to look brave while their stomachs betrayed them. Thomas was tied up. Joseph was right there among them, standing too clean, too safe. And in Catherine's mind, something connected that hadn't connected before. Two boys. Same age, same fear, different fate, not because one was better, because one had the right father. That thought didn't make her moral, it made her unstable, because now she couldn't unsee it. That night she told Marcus she didn't want to watch punishments anymore. Marcus looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You've been watching for 20 years, he said. "What changed?" Catherine's throat tightened. She could have said the truth. "I can't tell Joseph he's special while I watch other boys get destroyed for being hungry." But she didn't. People like Catherine don't confess. They calculate. So she said, "I'm tired." Marcus shrugged like that settled it. Later, after the house went quiet, after the lamps were turned down, Catherine heard something that made her sit straight up in bed. Footsteps. Not hurried, not drunken, not lost. Measured, coming down the hall, stopping outside Joseph's door. And then that same soft click. No creak, no mistake, just intention. Catherine didn't reach for a candle. She reached for certainty. And when she opened that door, she saw Marcus standing over the boy again, too close, too calm, like this was part of the routine. Joseph's eyes met hers in the dark. Not crying, not screaming, just pleading without words. Catherine stepped inside and closed the door behind her. And Marcus turned slowly, the smile gone, his face carrying the same message every tyrant carries when he's challenged in his own house. "You're in my way," he said. Catherine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to, because in that silence she made a decision that would turn Cypress Ridge into a graveyard. And she knew Marcus wouldn't let her walk away from it, not alive. Marcus didn't strike her. That's what surprised her most. Men like him usually react fast when their authority cracks. A slap, a shove, something loud enough to remind everyone who owns the room. But Marcus just watched her, eyes narrowing, measuring the shift. He was doing math. Joseph was shaking now, not crying, holding it in. That kind of control doesn't come from safety. It comes from practice. Catherine stepped closer to Marcus until they were nearly chest to chest, close enough that if he moved wrong, she'd feel it before she saw it. "You don't touch him," she said. Marcus laughed quietly, not amused, curious. "You forget," he replied. "Everything in this house belongs to me." That word everything hung in the air like a loaded gun. Catherine moved before thought caught up. Her hand cracked across his face. Hard, flat, final. The sound was sharp, wrong, impossible. Marcus stumbled half a step, more from shock than pain. His eyes burned now, not with anger yet, but disbelief. Nobody hit Marcus Webb, nobody. Catherine didn't stop. She hit him again, then again. Years of swallowed obedience came out through her fists. Years of pretending the system was clean because it benefited her. "You ever come near him again," she said, voice shaking but deadly clear, "I'll bury you where no ledger can find you." For the first time in decades, Marcus Webb backed away from someone inside his own house. He adjusted his coat, wiped blood from his lip, and smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "This changes nothing," he said. "You understand that." Catherine did understand. That was the worst part, because Marcus didn't retreat out of fear. He retreated to plan, and planning was his gift. From that night on, Catherine stopped sleeping. She started watching. She watched how Marcus moved through the plantation with a new sharpness, how his punishments became slower, more deliberate, how he tested boundaries without crossing them outright. She saw what she hadn't wanted to admit before. Marcus enjoyed the work, not the profits, not the order, the pain. He liked knowing exactly how much pressure a body could take before it broke. He liked being the man everyone feared but depended on. Fear fed him, precision excited him, and Catherine had helped sharpen that blade. That realization sat in her chest like a sickness. She began spending more time with Joseph, teaching him things that weren't on the plantation's schedule, reading deeper, writing cleaner, teaching him how to listen more than he spoke. "How do you know when someone's lying?" he asked her once. Catherine paused. "When their story protects them too well," she said. Joseph nodded like he understood more than a child should. Out in the quarters, whispers started. "Why does the overseer's boy live like that? Why don't they whip him? Why does he eat while we starve?" Resentment doesn't need instructions. It grows on its own. Catherine saw it building and knew it wouldn't be aimed at Joseph forever. Eventually, it would turn on her. Then came the whipping. Thomas, 8 years old, same height as Joseph, same hunger, different blood. Marcus ordered everyone to watch. Catherine tried not to go, tried to stay inside, pretend ignorance still worked. But the sound carried, the crowd carried. The moment dragged her out like gravity. She stood there when the first strike landed. When Thomas screamed, when skin split. And this time something inside her didn't bend, it snapped. She didn't see Thomas anymore. She saw Joseph. She saw what protection really was, random, selfish, cruel. That night she told Marcus she was done watching. "I can't stomach it," she said. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. "Fine," he replied. "I'll do it where you can't see." That was the deal. Same brutality, different location. Catherine went back to her room and vomited until there was nothing left. She understood now. There was no fixing this place. No reforming Marcus. No clean exit, only moves, so she started making them, quiet ones. She visited the quarters alone, not to give orders, to listen. She learned names she'd never bothered to learn before, learned who limped because of old punishments, who avoided Marcus's shadow, who still carried rage without letting it show. She didn't promise freedom, she promised truth. "I know how he thinks," she told a man named Samuel one night, her voice low. "I know where he's weak." Samuel didn't smile, didn't thank her. He asked, "What you want in return?" That question told her everything she needed to know. Trust wouldn't come from apologies, it would come from usefulness. Word spread slowly, carefully, like contraband. Catherine wasn't seeking redemption, she was recruiting. By the time she found Marcus standing in Joseph's doorway again weeks later, this time pretending innocence, pretending accident, she already knew what she was going to do. She didn't scream this time. She didn't hit him. She just looked at him and said, "You've mistaken patience for permission." Marcus smiled like a man amused by a threat he didn't take seriously. "You won't do anything," he said. "You're too invested." He was right about one thing. Was invested, just not in him. That night Catherine sat alone and made a choice that didn't come with a way back. She wouldn't fight the system from outside it, she would turn it inside out. And Marcus Webb, master of calibrated pain, would be taught by his own curriculum. But she needed a reason everyone could stand behind, a spark loud enough to justify what came next. And somewhere on Cypress Ridge a young man was already being watched. Resistant, strong, unbroken. Marcus was circling him. And Catherine knew, when Marcus made his move, the whole board would tip. Someone was about to be made an example. The only question was who. David didn't know he was already marked. That's how it always works. The man who's about to become the lesson thinks he's just surviving another day. Head down, hands busy, mind elsewhere. He doesn't realize the boss has been watching him like a problem that needs solving. David was 20, strong without showing off, smart without announcing it. He worked just slow enough to breathe, looked Marcus in the eye just long enough to be noticed. That was enough. On Cypress Ridge, subtle resistance was louder than open defiance. It said you still thought you belonged to yourself. Marcus couldn't allow that. He summoned David like you summon bad weather. Calm, public, deliberate. "You've been forgetting your place," Marcus told him, voice smooth, almost bored. "I'm going to remind you, in front of everybody." David didn't beg, didn't argue, didn't give Marcus the pleasure of fear. He nodded once. That nod sealed it. By sundown the order was out, all hands to the yard. Nobody stays away. This wasn't just punishment, it was theater. Catherine heard about it before Marcus finished giving instructions. That's what power networks do when they're awake. Word moved through the quarters faster than Marcus could imagine. Every person Catherine had spoken to, every quiet conversation she'd planted, every truth she'd whispered, it all converged into one message. It's happening. She went to David before shows like this always begin. Found him alone, wrists already marked from rope practice, face calm in a way that scared her more than panic would have. "They're going to hurt you," she said. David looked at her, eyes steady. "I know." "This isn't random," she added, "and you won't be alone." He studied her like a man deciding whether to trust a bridge built out of words. "Whatever you're planning," he said, "don't stop it for me." That told her something too. The yard filled up under a burning sun. 400 bodies, no shade, no noise, just waiting. Marcus arrived dressed like always, clean, white shirt, hat low, whip coiled like a promise. He loved these moments, the silence, the weight of attention, the way fear traveled outward from him in waves. David was tied to the post, shirt gone, back bare, ready to be turned into a memory everyone else would carry. Marcus lifted the whip. That's when Catherine stepped forward. Gasps rippled, not loud but sharp, like glass breaking somewhere deep. She walked straight into the open space, heels clicking against dirt that had swallowed screams for years. "Stop," she said. Marcus froze. You could feel it, the whole plantation holding its breath. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said no," Catherine replied. "This ends here." Marcus laughed, short, disbelieving. "You're embarrassing yourself," he said. "Go back inside." She didn't move. "I'm done pretending this is necessary," she continued. "I'm done pretending you're anything but what you are." Marcus's face tightened. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're undermining me in front of them." "That's the point," she said. For half a second nobody moved, and then the ground shifted. From the edges of the crowd people stepped forward, not rushing, not shouting. Coordinated, calm, 25 of them exactly where they needed to be. Marcus turned too late. Hands grabbed him, not wild, precise. Someone took the whip, someone locked his arms, someone else slammed his knee from the side. He hit the ground hard. The yard exploded into motion, not chaos, control. Marcus tried to scream. A gag cut it off. In less than a minute, the man who ran Cypress Ridge was bound like livestock. Catherine stood over him, looking down without triumph. "You taught us everything," she said quietly. "Now it's your turn to learn." They dragged him away while the yard stood stunned, the illusion shattered beyond repair. What happened over the next 3 days wasn't loud. It was thorough. Marcus didn't die fast. He died learning. Every trick he'd perfected came back with interest. Every fear he'd exploited was tested on him. Water, restraints, waiting, pain measured in breaths instead of blows. Catherine never raised her voice. She directed. And when Marcus finally broke, really broke, he understood the thing he'd never allowed himself to consider. Systems don't love their architects. They replace them. On the third night, Marcus Webb stopped breathing. By morning, Cypress Ridge was already falling apart. Overseers panicked. Orders contradicted each other. Guns pointed in too many directions. And in that confusion, exactly where Catherine said it would happen, people ran. Hundreds. Into the trees. Into the water. Into the dark. Joseph was gone before sunrise, papers in his pocket, money sewn into his clothes, never looking back. Catherine stayed. She knew what was coming: chains, courts, a rope if the state had its way. As soldiers closed in and the plantation burned behind them, Catherine stood alone in the yard where everything had started. She didn't regret the choice, but she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the point where the consequences finally caught up. And they were coming fast. They took Catherine at dawn. No struggle, no drama, just iron on wrists and eyes that wouldn't meet hers. The soldiers didn't see a mastermind. They saw a woman out of place in the wreckage. Someone easy to blame once the real damage had already escaped into the trees. Cypress Ridge was quiet in a way it had never been. Too quiet, like a room after the gun smoke clears and nobody wants to speak first. Marcus's body had been found. What was left of it, enough to confirm death, enough to confirm humiliation. The state moved fast when its symbols fall. By nightfall, Catherine was in a cell charged with everything they could stack on her name: murder, conspiracy, incitement, crimes that needed a villain more than they needed accuracy. She didn't argue. She didn't deny. Men like Marcus teach you something useful before they destroy you. Never waste energy begging a system that already decided your fate. The trial became theater. White faces in the gallery. Black bodies absent, already vanished into swamp and rumor. The plantation owner's lawyers painted Catherine as unstable, hysterical. A woman who let emotion rot her reason. They didn't want the truth. The truth was inconvenient, because the truth said Marcus wasn't an exception, he was a feature. Catherine told her story anyway. Calm, measured, no tears, no apologies. Just facts laid out like evidence the court didn't ask for. "I acted," she said, "because no one else would." That line hit harder than she intended. Newspapers picked it up, first locally, then north. Then everywhere people were already arguing about what kind of country this really was. Some called her a monster, some called her a hero. Catherine called herself neither. She was convicted. The rope was set. Then the witnesses came forward. Not lawyers, not ministers. The people who hadn't escaped. Men and women who spoke about Marcus with scars instead of speeches, about the things done in private rooms, about children hurt and hunger punished like crime. Public opinion shifted the way it always does, slow, then suddenly. The sentence changed. Life instead of death. A mercy that felt heavier than the rope would have been. They sent her north to a women's penitentiary built on silence and isolation. A place designed to erase people without killing them. Catherine adapted. Silence didn't scare her. She de-lived around it her whole life. Months passed. Then something new entered the prison. Enslaved women, captured, waiting to be returned. Among them was a woman named Rachel. Rachel had eyes like someone who had already lost everything worth fearing for. The prison didn't know what to do with them, so they locked them together in the basement. Broke their own rules out of convenience. That mistake would cost them. Catherine saw Rachel for the first time while cleaning the corridor. No words exchanged, just recognition. The kind that doesn't need explanation. She left food where it would be found. Rachel left drawings where they could be seen, trust built in fragments. Then one day a guard made the oldest mistake in power. He got careless. Keys left unattended. Just long enough. Rachel didn't hesitate, doors opened, chains fell. Women moved, they freed Catherine last. She stepped out of her cell and didn't look back. What followed wasn't chaos, it was direction. Catherine knew the building, the blind spots, the rhythm of patrols. She spoke once fast and low, now. They overwhelmed the guards without killing a single one, locked them up the way the system had taught them. And then the women disappeared into the night. The manhunt was brutal, dogs, rewards, headlines, but the network caught them. The old route still worked if you knew who to trust. They reached the north battered but breathing. Rachel found her children. Catherine found something else. Work, no speeches, no forgiveness tour, just classrooms, chalk. Children learning letters they'd been denied, she taught, quietly. Relentlessly. Some hated her for who she'd been. Some learned anyway. Years passed like that. No redemption arc. No public absolution. Just time and consequence walking side by side. When Catherine died, there were no statues. Just former students, grown, standing taller than they'd been allowed to dream. Rachel stood among them, and somewhere far south in land that still remembered blood in its soil, Cypress Ridge rotted back into swamp. No marker, no monument, just a lesson most systems never learn until it's too late. Power trains people how to overthrow it, and once that knowledge spreads, there's no locking the door again. Here's the part nobody likes to talk about, because it doesn't end with freedom. It ends with echoes. Years after Cypress Ridge fell apart, people still whispered Marcus Webb's name like it might answer back. Overseers across Louisiana adjusted their tone, shortened their punishments, watched the room a little more carefully, not out of mercy, out of fear. Because something dangerous had happened on that plantation, something worse than rebellion. The enslaved had learned how asterisk power worked. They learned that cruelty wasn't random, that it followed patterns, that men like Marcus relied on predictability, obedience, and the belief that nobody would ever dare touch the architect. That belief died screaming. Catherine never said she regretted it. She never said she didn't. She understood something most people never do. Once you cross a certain line, you don't get to decide how the story remembers you. In Philadelphia, she kept her head down. No speeches, no interviews. When abolitionists tried to turn her into a banner, she refused to hold the pole. "I didn't do it for you," she told one of them flatly. "I did it because a child was in danger." That answer disappointed everyone who wanted a cleaner narrative. Joseph never wrote her letters. That was part of the agreement. Clean breaks survive longer. She heard rumors, though. A free man, educated, gone west, alive, that was enough. Rachel visited the school sometimes, older now, softer around the edges but still sharp where it mattered. They never talked about the prison break, never talked about Marcus. Some things don't need to be reopened to stay understood. On quiet afternoons, Catherine would watch children write their names for the first time, watch them hesitate, then commit. Ink scratching against paper like a declaration. She'd think about Cypress Ridge, about how long it took for her to see the truth, about how many people never get that moment at all. And sometimes, only sometimes, she'd wonder if the system learned anything. The answer came from the South. Different plantation, different name. Same methods, power doesn't retire, it just relocates. What Catherine did didn't end slavery. It didn't cleanse her hands. It didn't balance the scales. What it did was simpler, more dangerous. It proved that even the most controlled machine can be dismantled by someone who understands it better than its maker. Not with rage, with patience. With intelligence, with timing. That's how real power shifts, quietly, suddenly, and all at once. Because the most lethal people aren't the loud ones. They're the ones who wait, learn the rules, and then decide exactly when to break them. Time passed, but it didn't soften anything. It just spread the damage wider. In the years after Catherine faded into routine in classrooms, Cypress Ridge became a warning told in low voices. Overseers didn't reference it directly. They didn't have to. A pause before a punishment, a glance over the shoulder, a rule enforced a little less boldly. Fear had changed addresses, but fear never leaves the neighborhood. Down south, new men stepped into old roles. Younger, hungrier, less refined. They brought louder violence, sloppier control. The kind that burns hot and fast. The kind that creates chaos instead of order. And chaos always invites attention. Runaways increased. Sabotage followed. Fields burned where nobody claimed responsibility. A generation that grew up hearing fragments of what happened at Cypress Ridge learned the most important lesson without being taught. The boss is human, and humans bleed. Catherine heard pieces of this through conversations she pretended not to listen to, through visiting teachers, through newspaper headlines folded away from children's eyes. She never smiled because she understood the cost. For every Marcus who fell, 10 more learned the wrong lesson. They tightened their grip, increased surveillance, punished faster. Harder, earlier, systems adapt. That's how they survive. One winter evening, a student asked her a question she didn't expect. "Miss Webb," the boy said, chalk dust on his fingers, "do bad people know they're bad?" The room went quiet. Catherine considered the safest lie. Then rejected it. "No," she said, "they think they're necessary." The boy nodded, absorbing it like a rule of physics. Later that night, Catherine sat alone and understood something that had taken her a lifetime to accept. She hadn't escaped the system. She had just switched sides of the equation. Teaching was another kind of power, slower, less dramatic, but it changed what people believed they were worth. And belief is the seed of every rebellion that actually works. Rachel understood that too. When Rachel died, quietly surrounded by family, Catherine attended the funeral from a distance. She didn't step forward, didn't intrude. Some debts aren't meant to be repaid publicly. Catherine lived longer than most expected, long enough to see slavery end on paper. Long enough to know paper doesn't erase memory. When she died, there were no final words, no confession, no plea. Just a woman who understood too late and then did something irreversible with the knowledge. History would argue about her. That was fine, because the real impact of Cypress Ridge wasn't in court records or sermons or stories told to feel righteous. It was in the pause before a whip fell, in the hesitation before a door opened at night, in the quiet understanding that power, once studied, can be taken apart piece by piece. That's the truth most empires learn too late. And once someone sees the whole board, they never unsee it. There's one last thing that never made the papers. It's the part that stays in the street. Years after Catherine was gone, long after Cypress Ridge dissolved into mud and memory, a man passed through Harlem who carried himself like he'd learned patience the hard way. He didn't talk about plantations, didn't talk about prisons, but when conversations drifted toward power, real power, he listened differently. He once said something in a back room that stuck with me. "Most bosses think control comes from noise," he said, "but noise is just fear begging to be noticed." That line didn't come from books. It came from history surviving in fragments. Cypress Ridge wasn't remembered as a rebellion. Rebellions are loud, fast, easy to crush. It was remembered as something worse, a lesson. People learned that systems fall when the people inside them stop believing the rules are permanent. When someone studies the structure long enough to know where the stress points lie. Catherine never called herself a strategist, but she was. She learned the rhythm of cruelty, the timing, the psychology. She understood that power doesn't collapse when you attack it head-on. It collapses when you turn its own discipline against it. That's what Marcus never understood. He believed fear moved in one direction. He believed ownership meant immunity. He believed his wife was part of the furniture, useful, silent, loyal. That miscalculation cost him everything. And that's the danger of people who think quietly. They don't announce their exit from the game. They change the rules while you're still playing by the old ones. Cypress Ridge taught something that outlived everyone involved. That control built on cruelty creates students. That oppression is a classroom. And that the most dangerous moment for any empire is when the people it trained decide to apply the lessons back. That's not a moral, that's not redemption, that's strategy. And once you understand that, you stop asking who's right. You start asking who's prepared. Because in every system, there's always someone watching, learning, waiting. And when they finally move, It's already too late. Let me leave you with this. Power never disappears. It changes clothes. What Catherine Webb did wasn't unique because it was violent. History is full of violence. What made it dangerous was that it was *informed***. She didn't lash out. She didn't pray for rescue. She didn't wait for permission. She learned the system better than the man who ran it. That's how the game really flips. Marcus thought dominance lived in the whip, in the rules, in the fear he could summon on command. But fear is a currency that devalues fast once people learn its exchange rate. Catherine saw that. So did the people she taught. That's the part most stories skip, the aftermath inside the minds of survivors, long after the soldiers left, long after the trials ended, long after the headlines moved on. Those people carried knowledge now, not hope, not slogans. Knowledge. They knew how authority watched. They knew how punishment was timed. They knew when cruelty needed witnesses and when it needed silence. And that knowledge didn't stay in Louisiana. It traveled, quietly, through families, through whispers, through habits passed down without explanation. That's how real revolutions move, not with banners but with memory. Catherine understood in the end that there was no cleansing what she'd become, no erasing her fingerprints from the system she helped build and then tore apart. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She accepted consequence. That's a rare thing. Most people want to be heroes in the story they survive. Catherine settled for being effective, and effectiveness always comes with a price. So when people ask whether she was good or evil, they're asking the wrong question. The real question is this: who learned? Marcus didn't. He died thinking the rules protected him. Catherine did, and she made sure others learned too. Because once someone sees the whole board, once they understand how power really moves, they don't need permission to change the outcome. They just need timing, and timing is everything. That's the story, not of redemption, not of justice, but of what happens when quiet intelligence finally decides to act, and by the time anyone notices, the game is already over. There's a reason stories like this never really end, because somewhere right now a system is being studied, not challenged, not protested, studied. Somewhere a person is learning the routines, the blind spots, the habits that power repeats when it gets comfortable. They're not angry yet. Anger's noisy. They're patient. That's always the dangerous stage. Cypress Ridge didn't fall because people were brave. Bravery alone gets you killed. It fell because someone stopped believing the structure was untouchable. And once that belief dies, everything else follows. Catherine understood something Marcus never did. Authority isn't enforced by violence. It's enforced by belief. Belief that punishment is inevitable. Belief that resistance is useless. Belief that tomorrow will look exactly like today. Break that belief and the whole operation starts shaking. That's why institutions fear educators more than rebels. Why knowledge is always rationed. Why silence is enforced before chains. Because chains are obvious. Understanding is contagious. Catherine didn't live to see the full consequences of what she set in motion. No one ever does. That's the cost of moving early, of acting before the world agrees with you. But the lesson stayed. It stayed in the pauses, in the hesitations, in the way power stopped feeling eternal. And that's the part you should sit with, because every era has its Cypress Ridge, every city has its Marcus, and every system has someone watching quietly from the edge, learning how it really works. They don't announce themselves, they don't threaten, they don't rush, they wait. And when they move, it won't look like chaos, it'll look like inevitability. That's how the game actually changes, not with noise, with understanding. And once that understanding spreads, the clock is already ticking. Here's the quiet truth beneath all of it. Nobody at Cypress Ridge woke up thinking they'd end an empire that morning. Empires don't fall to declarations. They fall to erosion, to habits changing, to fear losing its grip 1 inch at a time. Marcus thought permanence was his shield. That's the mistake every dominant man makes. He believed the system loved him because it rewarded him. He didn't see that it was only renting his cruelty, that the moment he became replaceable or worse, exposed, the same structure would let him die without comment. Catherine saw that before it was fashionable, before it was safe. before it was forgivable, and she paid for it in full, not with forgiveness, not with peace, with weight, the kind of weight you carry alone. Her story doesn't ask you to admire her. It doesn't ask you to forgive her. It asks you something far more uncomfortable. What would you do if you truly understood the system you lived inside? Not the slogans, not the justifications, the machinery. Would you look away once you saw it clearly? Would you benefit quietly? Or would you decide calmly, deliberately that the rules no longer applied? Because that's the real dividing line, not good and evil, not victim and villain, but those who never learn the game, and those who learn it too well. Cypress Ridge is gone. The name's faded. The land swallowed back into water and time, but the lesson didn't die there. It moved. It always does. And somewhere, someone is standing very still, watching power repeat itself, already knowing how this ends. The only thing left unanswered is simple. When they decide to move, who's ready? And who still thinks the system loves them? The ones who think the system loves them are always the last to hear the footsteps. They mistake comfort for loyalty, routine for protection. They sit in their offices, their houses, their gated versions of safety, believing the rules exist for their benefit, believing the violence is pointed outward, believing the machine would never turn inward. That belief is the softest spot. Marcus had it. The plantation owner had it. Every man who signed papers and never walked the fields had it. They all thought power was permanent because it had never been challenged correctly. Not loudly, not emotionally, correctly. Catherine's real crime wasn't murder, it wasn't rebellion, it was comprehension. She understood the machinery so well that she could reach inside it without getting crushed, until she chose to stop caring whether she survived the process. That's what separates casualties from catalysts. And here's the part nobody teaches. Once someone shows it can be done, the idea never goes back in the box. You can execute the body. You can bury the story. You can rename the streets. But you can't unteach awareness. Somewhere, someone always remembers that a system built on fear collapses the moment fear changes direction. That control is fragile. That silence is not consent, it's observation. And observation is dangerous. So when things feel stable, when punishment feels routine, when power feels comfortable, that's when you should worry. Because that's usually when someone somewhere has already learned enough. And they're not angry, they're ready. Read the pattern long enough and it stops being history. It starts feeling like a warning. Every system believes it's different, more refined, more legal, more justified. That's how it sleeps at night. That's how it explains the damage it causes as necessary. Cypress Ridge told that same lie. So did the courtrooms. So did the prisons. So did the polite voices that said this is just how things work. Catherine learned the most dangerous lesson a person can learn inside a violent structure. That cruelty doesn't need monsters, it needs administrators. Marcus wasn't born ruthless. He was trained, rewarded, validated. Every efficient punishment earned him praise. Every broken body made him indispensable. He became powerful by being useful. And usefulness is the mask evil wears when it wants to feel reasonable. Catherine had worn that mask too. That's why her turn was so destructive. She didn't come from the outside with ideals. She came from the inside with blueprints. She knew where power hit its nerves. She knew which fears were buried deepest. She knew how long a man like Marcus could endure before his confidence collapsed into panic. And she knew something else, that once people see power bleed, they stop imagining it as divine. They start imagining it as temporary. That's the moment everything changes. After Cypress Ridge, the South didn't become kinder. It became quieter. And quiet is never peace. Quiet is calculation. You could feel it in the air of the era, like pressure building before a storm nobody wanted to name. Laws tightened, patrols doubled, punishments escalated faster, not because rebellion had won, but because authority had felt itself shake. That's the irony. The more violently a system reacts, the more it reveals its fear. Catherine spent her final years surrounded by children who asked better questions than adults ever did, questions about fairness, about rules, about why some people decide and others endure. She never answered with slogans. She taught them how to read, how to count, how to recognize patterns, because once you can read the world, you stop accepting it at face value. That's the real inheritance she left behind. Not the rebellion, not the blood, not even the story. The skill. And skills spread, quietly, dangerously. Here's where the story leans forward instead of closing its eyes, because everything up to now sounds finished, resolved, neatly filed under asterisk, then asterisk. That's how people stay comfortable, by believing the danger lived in another century. But the lesson didn't retire with Catherine, it adapted. After her death, the school kept running. New teachers, new rules, same quiet mission: teach children how to see, how to question what's presented as permanent, how to notice when authority depends on being unquestioned. That kind of education doesn't announce itself. It waits. Some of those children grew up and moved south again. Some went west. Some stayed put and learned how to speak just enough to pass, just enough to listen. They didn't carry Catherine's name. They carried her understanding, and that's the part nobody tracks. Not courts, not newspapers, not historians hunting clean arcs and moral conclusions. You can lock up a woman, you can hang a man, you can burn a plantation to the ground, but you can't imprison a method once it's been learned. Every system has people inside it who believe they're untouchable, who think the paperwork protects them, who mistake obedience for loyalty and silence for peace. And somewhere near them, always near them, is someone who's not angry, someone who's patient, someone who understands that power isn't challenged head-on, it's studied, disassembled, fed back to itself in ways it doesn't recognize until it's too late. That's the real ending of Cypress Ridge. Not the deaths, not the trials, not the escapes. The ending is the pause before the next move. The moment when someone, somewhere, finally understands the whole board and decides the game doesn't have to continue the way it always has. Because once that decision is made, system never sees it coming. Not until the door clicks shut behind it. Here's the danger most people miss. Systems don't collapse when they're hated. They collapse when they're asterisk understood asterisk asterisk. Hatred is loud, predictable, easy to isolate. Understanding is quiet, it blends in, it waits. Cypress Ridge didn't die screaming, it died confused. One day the rules worked. The next day they didn't. Marcus never heard the moment control slipped away. That's how clean it was. By the time he felt hands on him, the decision had already been made weeks earlier, months earlier, in whispers and glances and calculations he never noticed. That's how it always happens. The most dangerous people in any system are the ones who stop reacting and start observing. The ones who don't argue with power, don't challenge it publicly, don't expose themselves early. They study it like a map. They learn what makes it predictable, what makes it lazy, what makes it arrogant. And arrogance is the real weakness. Catherine learned that too late to save herself, but early enough to teach it to others. That's the part that should make you uneasy, because knowledge doesn't stay loyal. It doesn't care who taught it or why. It just moves, from mind to mind, from generation to generation, from place to place. Right now, somewhere, someone is noticing patterns that feel familiar. Someone is realizing the rules don't exist because they're just, but because they've never been questioned correctly asterisk asterisk. And when that person stops asking questions out loud, that's when you should worry. Because the moment you stop hearing resistance, it doesn't mean obedience won. It means the plan is finished. And whatever comes next won't announce itself. It never does. There's always a moment after a system cracks where people rush to explain it away. They call it an anomaly, a bad actor, a tragedy that won't repeat itself. That's how authority protects its sleep. After Cypress Ridge, officials wrote reports. Lawyers drafted language. New overseers were trained with improvements. Goal wasn't justice. It was insulation. Make sure this never happens again by tightening the grip, not questioning why the hand was shaking. But tightening a grip doesn't restore confidence. It advertises fear. And fear, once visible, invites inspection. The men who replaced Marcus were harsher, louder, quicker to punish. They believed intimidation would erase memory. What it actually did was confirm every quiet suspicion Catherine had planted. If they weren't scared, they wouldn't need to prove it. That understanding spread without meetings, without leaders, without slogans. It spread the way street knowledge always does, through observation. People noticed how guards flinched more, how orders contradicted each other, how authority felt rushed instead of assured. Those details matter. They tell you when a structure is still standing but hollow. Catherine never lived to see how far that ripple traveled, but she understood something most revolutionaries don't. You don't need to win, you just need to make certainty impossible. Once people stop believing power is permanent, obedience becomes a performance, and performances crack under pressure. That's the quiet aftermath of Cypress Ridge. Not freedom, not peace, uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous to any system built on control. So when people ask why this story still feels alive, why it doesn't sit comfortably in the past, it's because it isn't really about plantations or prisons or one woman's choice. It's about what happens when someone finally learns the rules well enough to stop respecting them. That knowledge never expires. It waits. And sooner or later someone else recognizes it for what it is, not history, but instruction. The most dangerous moment isn't the uprising. It's the calm that comes before anyone thinks one is possible. That's when people start mistaking silence for loyalty. That's when power relaxes. That's when routines get sloppy and confidence turns into habit. Cypress Ridge reached that moment long before it collapsed. Marcus thought he had loyalty because nobody spoke. He thought discipline meant devotion. He never understood that people were quiet because they were counting. Catherine counted too. She counted the steps between buildings. She counted who watched whom. She counted how long fear lasted before it had to be refreshed. That's what real control looks like from the inside, maintenance. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. After her death, nothing dramatic happened, no final reckoning, no wave of justice washing the past clean. What happened instead was smaller, more unsettling. People began asking better questions, not out loud, not all at once, just enough to notice when orders didn't make sense, when punishment felt rushed, when authority explained itself too much. That's when belief starts to rot. Because power never wants to explain, it wants to be assumed. The moment it has to justify itself, it's already bleeding. That's why this story still breathes. Because somewhere right now, someone is learning the same lesson Catherine learned too late and too well. Someone inside a system that rewards silence and punishes curiosity. They're not angry, they're not reckless, they're patient. And patience paired with understanding is the most dangerous combination there is. You won't hear them coming, you won't see them organizing, you won't feel the shift until it's already happened, just like Marcus didn't, just like every system that believes today will look like yesterday, until the door closes, the rules stop working, and someone finally makes their move. Here's the part that should sit heavy. Every system tells itself a bedtime story. It says, what happened before was different. We learned. We fixed the flaws. That's how it convinces itself it's immune. Cypress Ridge told that story right up until the moment it didn't matter anymore. Marcus believed power was something you exercised outward. He never understood the most dangerous power is inward, knowing when not to move, when to wait, when to let someone else think they're in control. Catherine learned that by accident. Then she weaponized it, not with speeches, not with banners, with information. She gave people the one thing domination cannot survive: clarity. Clarity about how fear is staged. Clarity about how punishment is timed. Clarity about how men who look unshakable depend on routine like oxygen. Once that clarity spreads, control becomes a performance. And performances collapse when the audience stops believing. That's why this story keeps resurfacing in different clothes, different eras, different places. Because someone always recognizes themselves in it. Someone always realizes they've been living inside a system that only works because nobody questions it the right asterisk way. Not with outrage, with insight. And that's the moment things get dangerous. Because once a person stops asking, why is this happening to me? And starts asking, how does this actually work? They're already ahead of everyone else in the room. Marcus never saw that shift coming. Neither did the courts. Neither did the guards. Neither did the men who believed uniforms and titles were protection. By the time they noticed something was wrong, it wasn't chaos they were facing. It was inevitability. And inevitability doesn't negotiate. It arrives quietly, locks the door behind you, and leaves you staring at the same question Marcus never thought to ask. Who's really been watching this whole time? Answer to that question is never comfortable, because the one watching usually looks harmless, ordinary, forgettable, someone the system already counted and dismissed. Marcus dismissed Catherine for years, not because she was weak, because she was useful. That's the blind spot. Systems reward usefulness until they forget it's a choice. They start believing loyalty comes baked in. That people won't notice the contradictions as long as they're fed, housed, labeled, explained. But someone always notices. They notice when rules bend for the powerful and snap for everyone else. They notice when cruelty wears a uniform and calls itself order. They notice when silence is demanded but never returned. And at first, they do nothing. That's the part that scares people later. They do nothing because they're learning, because reacting too early only teaches the system how to correct itself, because patience buys information. By the time Marcus felt eyes on him, the watching was over. The decision had already been made. That's the real legacy of Cypress Ridge. Not rebellion, not justice, not even vengeance. It's the reminder that power collapses fastest when it's most certain it's alone at the top, when it assumes no one else understands the machinery, when it mistakes compliance for ignorance. Because the moment someone inside the system understands it better than the person running it. The ending isn't loud, it's precise, and it doesn't ask permission. So if this story feels unfinished, that's because it is, not in the past, in the present. Somewhere someone is still watching, still counting, still learning where the pressure points are, and when they stop watching, that's when the move happens. There's a moment right before control breaks when everything feels normal. Schedules hold, orders get followed, punishments still land where they're supposed to. That's the trap, because normal is what power uses as camouflage. Marcus lived inside that comfort right up until the second his name stopped meaning safety. He never heard the click when belief locked behind him. Never felt the room change temperature. Never noticed how quiet people got when they'd already decided he was finished. That kind of silence isn't fear, it's alignment. And alignment is what systems can't defend against. Catherine understood that alignment doesn't come from speeches. It comes from shared understanding. From enough people seeing the same pattern at the same time and realizing they don't need permission to act. That's why Cypress Ridge didn't explode. It folded, one assumption at a time. And here's the part that lingers like a shadow you can't shake. Once people experience that shift, once they see that authority isn't permanent, they never fully go back. Even if they submit again, even if they keep their heads down, even if the system tightens its grip, they remember. They remember how fast certainty vanished. They remember how fragile the rules really were. They remember that the door didn't creak. That memory doesn't announce itself. It sits quietly, waiting for the next moment when power gets careless, when routines repeat too predictably, when confidence turns into habit again, and it always does, because no system believes it will be the one that gets studied. No ruler believes they're being measured. No architect imagines the blueprint in someone else's hands until the pressure shifts, until the room goes still, until someone realizes the game has already moved on without them. That's where this story leaves you, not with closure, not with comfort, but with a question that never stops mattering. If the system you live inside depends on nobody understanding it too well, who do you think is watching right now? Here, that's what makes the ending dangerous. The watcher doesn't always strike. Sometimes they wait long enough that the strike isn't necessary. Marcus lost because he believed force was the finish line. He never understood leverage, never understood that the real endgame is making power contradict itself, forcing it to choose between showing restraint and revealing fear. Catherine learned that lesson by standing too close to the fire. She saw how systems panic when their certainty cracks, how they overcorrect, how they expose themselves trying to look unshaken. That's the window, and windows don't stay open forever. Somewhere right now, a routine is being repeated, a punishment calibrated, a rule enforced because that's how it's always been. Somewhere, someone is taking notes without writing anything down. They're learning who talks too much, who moves first, who believes their title protects them. They're learning what the system does when it's tired, because tired systems make mistakes, and mistakes don't look like explosions. They look like small decisions made under pressure, a shortcut, a favor. A corner cut because no one thinks it matters, until it does. That's the final lesson of Cypress Ridge. Not that power can be overthrown, but that power can be outgrown. Once enough people stop needing it to explain itself. Once they stop believing it's inevitable. Once they understand the machinery better than the man turning the wheel. The system doesn't fall, it empties, and the ones still clinging to it won't even realize they're alone. Until the room goes quiet. The door clicks shut, and they finally understand. They were never the ones in control. After that, nothing dramatic happens. That's the detail that scares people the most. No final showdown, no trumpet blast, no clean victory you can point to and say that's when it ended. Because systems like this don't die in one moment, they hollow out. Marcus believed power meant being seen, heard, feared. He thought presence was control. He never understood that the real danger is when presence stops mattering. Catherine understood it too late to save herself, but early enough to leave a scar the system could never quite heal. After Cypress Ridge, after the trials and the prison and the escape, after the classrooms and the quiet years, what remained wasn't her name. It was the habit she taught. Watch first. Learn everything. Move only when the outcome is already decided. That habit doesn't belong to one era. It doesn't care about uniforms, laws, or borders. It survives wherever power assumes it's being obeyed instead of studied. That's why this story never really closes. Because right now, someone is sitting inside a structure that looks permanent. They're nodding at the right moments. Following rules just well enough to avoid attention. Saying very little. They're not broken, they're observant. And when they finally decide to move, it won't look like rebellion. It'll look like inevitability, like a door that doesn't creak, like a system that suddenly can't explain why it's failing, like power realizing too late that it trained the wrong person too well. That's where this story ends, not with justice, not with redemption, with understanding. And once understanding spreads, the outcome is only a matter of time. If this were a clean story, it would stop here. But clean stories are for people who have never been inside the machine. The truth is, nothing ever really resets. It just changes posture. New language, new uniforms, same instincts, same hunger for control. Same belief that obedience is permanent. That belief is always wrong, because somewhere, always somewhere, there's a person who isn't impressed, who isn't loud, who isn't broken. Someone who learned the way Catherine learned that power leaves fingerprints, that routines reveal weaknesses, that cruelty depends on being predictable. That person doesn't hate the system. Hate is sloppy. They understand it, and understanding is colder. Marcus thought the danger would announce itself. Thought rebellion would look like chaos, like noise, like desperation. He never imagined the threat would be someone who waited until the ending was already written. That's the final danger of Cypress Ridge. Not what happened there, but what it proved. That systems don't fall when they're attacked. They fall when they're solved. When someone sees the whole board and realizes the game only works because everyone agrees to keep playing. And once that agreement cracks, even a little, everything that felt solid starts feeling temporary. So if you're listening to this and it feels unfinished, good, it should. Because this story doesn't live in the past. It lives wherever power assumes it's untouchable, wherever silence is mistaken for loyalty, wherever someone is watching, learning, waiting, and when they finally move. You won't hear it coming. You'll just notice the rules stopped working, and by then, the door will already be closed. Here's what the machine never understands. It thinks survival means control. It thinks longevity proves legitimacy. It thinks time is on its side. That's backwards. Time is the weapon of the observer. Marcus thought 23 years made him untouchable. He mistook repetition for dominance. He never realized repetition is how patterns get exposed, how weaknesses get memorized, how inevitability gets rehearsed. Catherine didn't destroy Cypress Ridge the day Marcus fell. She destroyed it the moment she stopped believing it was permanent. That's the spark nobody sees. Once permanence dies in the mind, the body just follows instructions. Every system survives on a quiet agreement. This is how things are. Break that agreement and power has to work harder, explain more, punish faster, react instead of direct. That's when the balance shifts, not because people are brave, because the system is tired. Tired systems make noise. Tired systems overreach. Tired systems expose themselves. And somewhere nearby, always nearby, is someone who recognizes that sound. Someone who understands that exhaustion is louder than anger. They don't rush. They don't celebrate. They don't warn. They wait for the moment when control starts explaining itself. Because the moment power has to justify its existence. It's already lost. That's where this story leaves you. Not at the fall, not at the victory, but at the pause. The moment right before someone somewhere decides they've learned enough. And when they make that decision, you won't hear it announced, you'll feel it, when the rules stop making sense, when authority starts flinching, when the door closes without a sound. That's when you'll know the game has moved again. And someone just stepped into a position you didn't realize was open. Here's the part people underestimate. Power doesn't fall when it's hated. It falls when it gets predictable. Marcus was predictable. Same routines, same punishments, same confidence that tomorrow would look like yesterday. He didn't realize that consistency, unchecked, becomes a map. Catherine read that map line by line, and once you've read it, you don't rush to the ending. You let the ending come to you. That's what real control looks like, letting the other side exhaust itself trying to maintain an illusion. Every system has a moment when it starts repeating itself too cleanly, when authority stops adapting and starts assuming. When power believes it, S2 established to be studied. That's the moment the watcher finishes learning. Not the rebel, not the martyr, the watcher. They don't announce readiness. They don't test the waters. They don't need validation. They already know how this ends. Marcus thought the danger lived in rage. He never looked for understanding. Never considered that someone might know his system better than he did. By the time he realized the room had changed, the decision wasn't happening. It had already happened. And that's where this story leaves its last shadow. Because right now, somewhere you'd never expect, someone has stopped reacting. They've stopped asking for permission, stopped waiting for fairness, stopped believing the rules were written for them. They're just watching. And when someone stops watching, that's when the move gets made. There's a final illusion power clings to. It believes the watcher will eventually reveal themselves. That patience has an expiration date. That silence is temporary. That illusion has buried more kings than rebellions ever did. Marcus waited for defiance. He waited for shouting, for fists, for chaos he could answer with force. What he never prepared for was someone who didn't need to be seen. Catherine didn't announce her break from him. She didn't issue demands. She didn't storm the gates. She adjusted her position. That's the move most people never notice. The quiet shift. The moment someone stops playing the role assigned to them and starts playing the board instead. Once that happens, authority is already late. Because the watcher isn't asking if asterisk anymore. They're confirming when. And timing is the one advantage power can't confiscate. Somewhere right now, someone has finished learning, not from books, from proximity, from repetition. From watching the same mistakes get rewarded over and over again. They know who speaks too freely, who believes their title is armor, who thinks the rules protect them instead of expose them. They haven't moved. Not yet. Because the most dangerous move is the one made after everyone stops looking. That's where this part ends. Not with action, with readiness. The kind that doesn't need witnesses. The kind that only exists for one reason. So when the door finally closes, there's no doubt it was intentional. Here's where it gets specific. Because watchers don't stay abstract forever. At some point, the room gets smaller, the variables narrow, the system starts leaning on the same people, the same habits, the same shortcuts. That's when the observer stops studying everything and starts studying someone asterisk. Marcus thought he was unique. He was. Every system has a Marcus, a pillar everyone leans on, a problem solver who gets results, a person whose removal would create confusion instead of clarity. Those people don't see danger coming because they're praised too often to doubt their position. That's who the watcher locks onto, not the loudest, not the cruelest, the indispensable one. The watcher notices how often decisions funnel through them, how many routines depend on their presence, how many people quietly wait for their approval before acting. That's not strength, that's load-bearing weakness. Catherine understood that once she stopped seeing Marcus as a monster and started seeing him as infrastructure. Once you see someone that way, you don't attack them emotionally. You plan around the consequences of their absence. Right now, somewhere, someone has reached that same realization. They're no longer asking how to fight the system. They're asking what happens when this person isn't here anymore. Not killed, not exposed, just neutralized, removed from the equation in a way that forces everyone else to improvise. That's when panic spreads upward instead of downward. That's when authority reveals whether it was centralized or actually resilient. And here's the dangerous part. Once the watcher identifies the load-bearing piece, the move becomes optional, because the system starts collapsing under the asterisk knowledge alone. People hedge, people hesitate, people start preparing for a future they can't name. The watcher doesn't rush. They let the weight settle, because once enough people sense the same imbalance, the fall doesn't need a push, it just needs time. And time, when someone's patient enough, does the work for you. By the time anyone realizes what's happening, the system is already talking to itself. Meetings multiply, rules get rewritten, authority starts explaining instead of commanding. That's the tell. Because power that's confident doesn't narrate its decisions, it just acts. The moment it feels the need to justify itself, it's responding to something it can't see but can feel. The watcher sees that first. They notice how people start hedging their language, how orders come with disclaimers, how decisions get delayed because nobody wants to be the last one holding responsibility when things shift. That hesitation spreads faster than fear ever could. Marcus never noticed it on Cypress Ridge. He mistook compliance for stability. Didn't realize the plantation was already running on memory, not belief. By the time belief disappeared, he was just a man standing in the way of momentum. That's the quiet execution, not a body falling. A structure realizing it can't rely on itself anymore. Once that happens, the watcher doesn't need to strike. The system starts undoing its own work, double-checking, overcorrecting, contradicting itself into paralysis. People stop trusting the routine, stop trusting each other, stop trusting the rules to protect them and the watcher. They're already gone, not physically, positionally. They've stepped into a place where they don't need permission, don't need visibility, don't need force. They've moved before anyone thought movement was happening. That's the moment power fears most. Not rebellion, not exposure. Replacement. Because when a system realizes it can be bypassed instead of confronted, it understands too late that the game has already ended. One part remains. This is the seal, not the ending. The confirmation. By now, the system has adjusted itself into a shape it doesn't recognize. The rules still exist, but nobody believes in them the same way. Authority still speaks, but its voice doesn't travel as far. Orders still come down, but they land softer, like everyone's waiting to see if they really matter. That's when you know it's done. Not because something dramatic happened, because nothing has to. Marcus thought power lived in control. Catherine learned it lives in asterisk anticipation, asterisk, in who's ready before the moment arrives. She didn't win by force. She won by understanding the board well enough to step off it while everyone else was still arguing about the next move. That's the part people miss. The watcher doesn't replace power. They make it irrelevant. Once people realize they can move without asking. Once routines stop feeling mandatory. Once obedience becomes optional. The system doesn't collapse, it dissolves, and the ones still clinging to it won't even know when it happened. They'll just notice that decisions no longer go through them. That influence has shifted, that rooms go quiet when they speak. That silence isn't respect, it's bypass. So if you've listened this far and felt something tighten instead of resolve, that's not an accident. This story was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to show you how endings really happen. Quietly. Strategically. Without permission. Because the most dangerous people aren't the ones who rage against power. They're the ones who understand it. And move when everyone else is still waiting for a signal that never comes. That's the last lesson of Cypress Ridge. Not about the past, about how the game always ends. When someone sees the whole board and decides they don't need to play anymore.